Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. Ahem. I have prepared a few remarks for the occasion. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to get through this thing called life and to celebrate the life and times of Arif Godzilla Hassan. He was brought into this world by the Take Gods on September 27th, 1998-ish, and ascended back to them on this date, November 30th, 2020. He was known for many things over the years in the world of takes. He famously declared that beloved Viking legend Chad Greenway was, quote, not good at football. His inkling of an idea of an inability to throw left by then rookie Mitch Trubisky eventually reached national exposure and critical mass last year and inspired millions, probably. But most famously, his take on Carson Wentz being terrible has been the wildest ride of all. But he persevered. He knew this day would come. Not even a potential MVP season by Carson could change that man's mind. He knew what the rest of us did not. And for that, he is celebrated as one of the true prognosticators of our times. He was an oft stubborn, but too oft correct man. Sunday night featured Mitch Trubisky in prime time throwing a huge pick to the left side of the field, which likely sealed Arif's fate. And now we shouldn't be surprised by what happened next. When Carson Wentz threw that pick in the end zone when absolutely no one on the Eagles was near him by a country mile, that finally did it. He ascended. And that is it for Arif. We have to remind ourselves that some birds aren't meant to be caged. Their feathers are just too bright, and when they fly away, the part of you that knows it was a sin to lock them up does rejoice. Still, the place you live in is that much more drab and empty now that they're gone. Arif, you will be missed as I try to figure out how to fill an hour and a half to 2 hours of a show with football takes and not terrible relationship advice. Should friends desire, contributions can be sent to patreon.com/norsecode or The Athletic. Arif Hassan is my co-host. He writes for The Athletic. Arif, I'm speaking to you through a Ouija board tonight. How are you doing now that that Carson Wentz had his primetime moment?
Yes.
That's the response. It's just
well,
yes.
It's the most efficient way to communicate via Ouija board. There's 2 words and 26 letters. Come on.
I suppose doing this podcast would actually go longer
Somehow.
than the double show we did last week. If we did it straight through the Ouija board. I suppose you're right. Welcome to this episode of Norse Code. We have plenty of stuff to talk about, including just briefly, we can talk about what happened tonight with the with the Bears, with the Eagles rather. The Bears thing happened and that was hilarious last night, but the real stuff happened tonight with the Eagles. The Vikings managed to win on Sunday, and we definitely need to talk about that and just how it makes me wonder how Seattle fans have lived through the last couple of years, because it's said that Seattle never plays a normal game, albeit tonight is about the most normal one they could have possibly played, where everything just goes down to the wire and it's all wonky or whatever. So the Vikings did win. We have to talk about that. Teddy Bridgewater's return to Minnesota and all that. Also, there is a ton of COVID news that we should talk about because the NFL keeps moving a game, and Denver played a game without any quarterbacks, and there seems to be some discrepancies along the way as we go through this. So again, lots of stuff to talk about, including the mailbag. But before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for this for listening to Norse Code. Arif, so you obviously watched the game. You obviously tweeted throughout the game. But what was the moment that was the most special to you about Carson Wentz's performance tonight? Was it the fact that he was able to get that last second Hail Mary, or was there something else that did it for you?
Yeah, at the risk of being obvious, I'm going to have to pick the pick. I was looking for gifts to tweet out before the game of when he throws a back-breaking interception, and I chose I think a really great one as a Tom and Jerry floating up into heaven via escalator. Um, really phenomenal GIF. I encourage people to look at my timeline and find it. Um, and the fact that I prepared for it, I think, made it all the more special when it finally did occur and in a critical moment late in the game. Absolutely beautiful. I did enjoy the 2 snaps they gave to Jalen Hurts, and then the subsequent "Where the hell did Jalen Hurts go?" Tweets and comments from the broadcasters. That was great.
It was
Uh,
like they were like it's like they were just rubbing Carson's nose in it for just a moment. You're like, okay, now you go out there and you play. Like,
right, now go have fun out there, champ. They didn't even give him 3 downs. They gave him 2. Like they wouldn't even let him have his own 3 and out. And they're like, whoa. If we're gonna punt, it's gonna be Carson's fault.
well, see, that was the thing. Is I thought I'd watched the I thought I was ready to tune in, and I was late by a couple of minutes to turn on the game, and I noticed that Carson Wentz was playing. I'm like, oh, did Jalen Hurts get hurt? And I looked on Twitter. No, he just played for 2 for 2 snaps. Like, really?
So apparently,
That's
I
what
mean, like
happened?
he was taking like some first team reps in practice this week, and I'm just like wondering, like, why? If it's only for 2 snaps, like, why? Why would you take any time away in practice from the quarterback that you apparently think is better and is going to help you win this game that can still somehow get you into the divisional race? Um, why? Why would you take snaps away just so you can get 2 snaps of Jalen Hurts, which gets you 2 yards? Although, admittedly, at the time, that was 11 more yards than Carson Wentz had done from under center. So I suppose that was a highly efficient use of resources. But yeah, I mean, if you're gonna start like leeching resources away from your other quarterback, probably use it for more than just 2 snaps. That was just remarkable to me.
I'm just trying to envision like the Saints doing that with Jameis Winston. Like they bring Jameis Winston out for like 2 snaps, and then they put Taysom Hill in for the rest of the game. It's just like, what the hell was the point of that? And that's when the broadcasters have to remind us that that Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl 3 years ago. And oh yeah, that's right. How? I don't. Fine. So welcome to this episode of Norse Code. Again, thank you guys so much for listening. We have plenty of stuff to talk about, but before we do, just want to thank you guys so much for listening, and to those who have donated to the show. Again, thank you guys so much. We do have a new donation to the show by a man whose name I am going to slaughter, so apologize, and not trying to make a pun out of it either, but via PayPal, thank you to Benjamin Hogue, Benjamin Hogg, Benjamin Haig. Again, apologies. I do need a phonetic alphabet or explanation of names for donations. But again, thank you, Benjamin, so much. Your question will be answered at the top of the mailbag because it is a little bit more in depth and has a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about again at the top of the mailbag. So we will be talking about that in just a little bit. If you are interested in donating to the show, you can do so in one of 2 different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode and go there. The bonus episodes are posted about every week. We didn't post one last week because I managed to break my headphones as I was editing the second part, which would have made that like a 4.5-hour show if you subscribe to the Patreon. So the second, or you'll actually be getting the bonus episode for last week this week. So there's plenty of good stuff, including me messing up a word repeatedly, which I enjoyed, and apparently Arif did as well.
It was pretty great.
And a fantastic slip of the tongue that I didn't mean, or wasn't trying to anyway. Again, bonus episodes should be posted here today or tomorrow. Also, you can go to paypal.me/NorseCode as well, do a one-time donation, or you can go to norsecode.threadless.com and go over to the collections and take a look at the merchandise that we have posted there. There's plenty of stuff, and Threadless does all sorts of specials during the holidays. So if you are interested in such silliness, you can get the awesome logo from Draw Play Dave on a number of different items over at norsecode.threadless.com. So let's take a look at the Panthers game, because it started off even before the game happened. There's a lot of little storylines, including the fact that Adam Thielen was not going to play, which that's a big thing when you have the most efficient red zone offense in the league, or like the number one red zone offense in the league, and the number one wide receiver target for touchdowns in the league.
Right.
Like that's a big thing. And the fact that they kept mentioning whenever the Vikings made it to the red zone, oh, this is the number one red zone offense in all of football. Like, yeah, and the guy who's the number one target for that's out with COVID. Like, there's that turns out to be important. But the first drive that the Vikings had, it seemed like they at least knew what they were doing. They managed to go through stride, and Jefferson had a really great touchdown. After that, things got a little quiet on the Vikings offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, the Vikings did seem like they were struggling a little bit. They had a 3-and-out after that, and then they had a 6-play drive just after that. Although the 6-play drive came off of an interception, they were starting on the Minnesota 7. So they were at least lucky enough to get it to the 20 before punting. But yeah, no, it was difficult to get the Vikings going for a little bit. They eventually ended up being able to drive for a field goal, which was fine because it put the Vikings kind of back in the lead. But it really felt like, given the defensive struggles that Carolina's had this year, that, you would expect more of this offense. And I would say a lot of that, I think, has to do with the decision to run the ball as often as they did and the ineffectiveness of the running game. Like on a number of these drives, Dalvin Cook has negative yardage. So, for example, in the second quarter, there's a drive that starts off with a Dalvin Cook run for 2 yards, then one for 6 yards, and then a Dakota Dozier false start. But a third down, Kirk Cousins gets the ball off to Chad Beebe for 8 yards, then a negative 1 yard run, a negative 3 yard run, and then they try a screen for Brandon Dillon for only 6 yards, and that results in a punt, right? And so the passing game was staying on schedule. The running game just kind of wasn't there. And so I think a lot of that just has to do with the decision to run the ball, which is not necessarily always a coaching decision. Sometimes, you check into a look that you see, you've got, 7 blockers in the box, you see 6 defenders. And so sometimes, that's just based off of a quarterback check. But obviously the game plan for the Vikings here was to get Dalvin Cook going again and attempt to have one of those 200 yards from scrimmage games, just because, Adam Thielen's gone. They're going to want to run the ball a lot. And Carolina's had some issues up the interior with those defensive tackles. So I understand kind of why that would be the case, but it's clearly kind of why the offense just wasn't, doing a great job. And I think this harkens back to our discussion from earlier in the season when we were in the middle of Dalvin Cook's just remarkable nearly 700-yard outburst over 3 games. And we had a discussion about whether or not that this would continue, and that we actually had the same discussion last year when Cook was going off, that this is just not likely to sustain itself. And it turns out that that's exactly what happened. He goes up against a Bears defense that he's never been able to produce against. And, he doesn't do a very good job there, either because of him or the offensive line. And you could say, hey, well, he never does well against the Bears, and they've got the top rushing defense in the NFL. So now you've got Dallas. They've got a really poor defense, and in particular, poor linebackers and a poor defensive interior. But he doesn't do very well there. And then now you've got this Carolina Panthers game. And again, he doesn't pop off. So, yeah, it really seems like the moments where the offense was inefficient was a product, generally speaking, of the decision to run and an inability to execute on that decision. There were a couple of penalties throughout the game that hurt, of course. Obviously, like I said, the false start on Dozier, there's a false start on Beebe, which, there's going to be a lot of discussion about Chad Beebe in this episode. And then delay of game. And there was an intentional delay of game. I'm not counting on 4th and 1, but there was also in near the end of the half a delay of game that took 5 yards away while the Vikings were attempting to put themselves in scoring position, and it moved them from 3rd and 15 to 3rd and 20, at which point they just decided to run the ball. So yeah, the offense wasn't doing very well, but they were doing really well when they threw the ball. And so that, I think, kind of tells you that it was probably an over-reliance on the run game in this instance that led to just a really inefficient offense just in terms of the ability to put points on the board. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is we're going to go a little bit through the game because this was such a such a roller coaster, and say a little bit about some of these things, and then we'll do the actual individual efforts a little closer to the end. But as you mentioned, that the Panthers had the red zone pick by Eric Kendricks, and you had tweeted out something along the lines of, "Boy, that reminds me of that reminds me of a couple of Vikings practices."
Yeah. I mean, Teddy got picked off in the red zone by Eric Kendricks a number of times in training camp. So it was like kind of perfect that that's exactly what happened. Um, and of course, it's also perfect that it's like Kendricks who's just having a remarkable season. Started off, I'm not going to say entirely slowly, but not to the same level that he was playing with last year. And then as the year has accelerated, he's gotten a lot better. But yeah, I mean, it's another red zone interception for the Vikings. They've been really good in the red zone, in particular creating turnovers. We got a question about that we'll answer. But yeah, Bridgewater threw another red zone pick to Eric Kendricks. I mean, I've seen that a number. It's like him and Harrison Smith. And Anthony Barr actually got a couple in training camp too. It was a huge problem for Teddy early on.
Yeah. So initially, the Panthers were able to just shred the Vikings corners, but they were able to end up holding on that red zone pick. But then Robbie Anderson burned the Vikings for a 41-yard touchdown. And it just looked like every corner was way out of place.
Yeah. The early performances from the cornerbacks, just in general, especially Chris Boyd, were just brutal. I think with this one, you ended up with like what Chris Jones is covering deep, and he doesn't have any sort of cue to understand that the ball was caught, right? And so by the time he understands, he gets blocked out of the play. And I think here in this situation, it was not necessarily any particular cornerback's fault. I think the Vikings called a blitz that put Afadio Denbo in coverage. Robbie Anderson runs across the formation, and Teddy figures out kind of just exactly where the hole in the blitz is going to be. I think it's just kind of the right offensive play against the right defense. The Vikings took a gamble and lost. I don't think any particular player is necessarily at fault here, except, would have been nice for Chris Jones to realize that the ball had already been thrown. And even then, that's like you're kind of asking a lot when there's no audio cues for him to be able to kind of figure out that had happened. So yeah, Afadio Denbo lost in coverage to a receiver. That's, I guess, going to happen. But really what had happened here was that the Vikings had called a play that, based off of their film, they thought would work. It creates a pretty big risk. The Panthers had called the perfect answer to it, and they put a receiver into the coverage hole, and Teddy identified it right away. So sometimes you just kind of call the wrong play, and it ends up being a 40-yard touchdown. Man.
Yeah, that definitely didn't look like it was designed to go the length of the field.
Yeah, right.
After he made it like 1 or 2 yards after the catch, it's like, really? Okay, well, I'm just gonna keep going then. As a side note, can someone please teach Kirk Cousins how to slide? I feel like I've said this multiple times every season, but every year that I watch him go shoulder first intentionally into the ground, I just want to scream. Like, can someone teach him? Like, can he and Russell Wilson hang out one weekend, drink a bunch of that like bubble water, and figure out how to baseball slide or something?
I mean, we've been having this discussion about Vikings quarterbacks since Christian Ponder, right? Because Christian Ponder would dive head first, and I remember then, we asked Leslie Frazier, like, why is he doing that? That seems ill-advised. And at least in the case of Kirk Cousins, like in at least one of these scenarios, if he had slid, they wouldn't have gotten the first down, but because he dove, they did get the first down. So I guess I understand it in that specific scenario. But actually, Frazier came up with a really interesting talking point that I still have yet to find research for one way or the other. But he pointed out that quarterback injuries occur more often on slides than they do on head first dives, even though quarterbacks are protected on slides and they are not on dives. And that's just been kind of stuck in my head ever since then. And obviously you get more yards with the dive. So I guess if that's the case, that's kind of nice. But I really enjoy, like, Russell Wilson in particular is so good at sliding at just the right time to incur a penalty and get another 15 yards out of it. And so if you can do that, that's like, it might be a scenario where like level 1 is sliding, level 2 is diving, level 3 is sliding just to get a penalty, where you have to go back to sliding just to get a free 15 yards. Um, that would be nice, but it might just be the case that those additional yards and the lower likelihood, I guess, again, it's kind of difficult for me to believe, but Frazier said that he had research on this, that injuries were less likely to occur on the head first dives. But yeah, Teddy Bridgewater just famously awful at sliding. I remember one slide, it looked like he started his slide and then he just started rolling over, like tumbling on the ground. Like, Jesus Christ.
I do remember that. Which quarterback did the Vikings have that, like, either Joe Mauer or the Twins actually were called in to teach him how to slide? I'm trying to remember which one.
Oh, I remember that happening. I don't. I'm gonna Google this
That
right now.
had to be Ponder. That has to be that screams Christian Ponder to me.
I'm googling Twins Vikings teach slide.
This can't possibly go wrong.
Okay, so I am not getting anything. The first result is Aaron Rodgers teaches young Vikings, and then I kind of don't really want to read the rest of this headline.
Yeah, that's a terrible road to go down. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I can't find it right away. That's too bad. But that would be fun if we had that article. But yeah, it was Christian Ponder was intentionally not sliding. Teddy Bridgewater was bad at sliding. I think I remember Sam Bradford, was he not particularly good at it? And Kirk Cousins obviously not. Case Keenum I thought did fine at sliding.
Case Keenum was fine. It was one of the few times that you didn't actually have to sit and worry. I don't remember Bradford and his slides, and if I look up Bradford highlights on YouTube, I'm just going to see him getting hurt. Like,
and also, how many times is Bradford out of the pocket enough for him to slide?
Well, yeah, he was a statue. That was his appeal. That he was this great statue that birds could land on and then fly away. Like, it wouldn't matter. He was this awesome statue quarterback, and that's if that's the sort of thing you're into, then great. But yeah, Cousins and his shoulder first thing. You see quarterbacks go out all the time with shoulder injuries or shoulder soreness, and he's playing well right now. I just don't want this to be the one time that, like, tore his rotator cuff scrambling for 4 yards, fell forward like an idiot. Like, it just...
Maybe that's what you have to do to earn your team's trust. That was like a storyline for a second. I remember early, like 2018, so the first year that Cousins was with the Vikings. He like dove for a first down and like met contact, and everyone was like, "Man, I don't know if you should have done that. That seems kind of, you shouldn't have done that." And like Mike Zimmer was like, "Yeah, it's a good way to earn the respect of your teammates." And then a bunch of reporters are like, "Is it?" And then they asked a bunch of teammates without informing them that Mike Zimmer had said that, and they're like, "Oh yeah, absolutely, we love that." Which, yeah, sure, fine, whatever.
Pain is just cartilage leaving your kneecaps. It's fine.
Right. It's the fastest way to get respect without having to do anything.
That's okay. That actually does make a bit of sense. The Vikings then had an interesting 2-minute drill that went perfectly fine until they crossed the 50-yard mark, and then everything seemed to fall apart and they started going backwards, and Dan Bailey ended up bailing them out. This probably should have been the harbinger that something terrible was about to happen after halftime, but it just seemed like a series of just dumb mistakes on that last drive before the half.
Yeah, like you said, it started out fine. Like, again, of course, it starts out with a run, which is just so infuriating. This time it was not for 70 yards, it was for 2. But Kirk Cousins gets 9 yards, gets a first down, gets 7 yards, forces 2nd and 3. Cook gets a run for 5 yards, and obviously they're running the ball here, I guess, to manage the clock. Although, again, I don't love that idea before you cross the 50, and then we're on the Minnesota 43 at the time. But yeah, Kirk Cousins, drops back to pass, scrambles, gets 11 yards, throws an incompletion, but then makes up for it with Kyle Rudolph. And this is kind of at the point that we're talking about. So the Vikings are out of timeouts because they used or not out of timeouts. They got 1 timeout left that they're reserving for the field goal unit. And they used that second timeout because of the Cousins scramble. But they no longer have a ton of luxury to throw over the middle here. Cousins throws over the middle on a 12-yarder on 2nd and 10. Yeah, you get the first down. They quickly have to spike to stop the clock, and then Chad Beebe false start 5 yards, no play. So 2nd and 15. Cousins throws incomplete deep to Jefferson. That stops the clock with 16 seconds left, which is kind of remarkable, right? Because the play clock starts at 17 seconds, but they've got 16 seconds left, and then there's another penalty, a delay of game, in the middle of like hurry up, right? A delay of game. And that moves them back 5 yards. So they're on 3rd and 15 and they're back at 3rd and 20. And then at that point, they're not trying to convert. So
how do you take a delay
run.
of game in a 2-minute drill?
I don't know. Like, and I understand that the clock is stopped. So like, it's not necessarily the same urgency, but like, there's always some urgency driving you in the middle of a 2-minute drill. And so like the fact that happened is absolutely bonkers to me, that they took a delay of game penalty there. And it was great because like we're in the middle of this conversation about whether or not Cousins has the ability to kind of close in the final minutes of a game. And though the 2-minute stuff at the end of the half where he is also bad, that has not helped. And that delay of game penalty, I think, just kind of at the moment adds to the discussion in a particular way. Obviously, kind of later in the game, we kind of moved the discussion in the opposite direction. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. It felt like for major moments of the game that the Vikings were always kind of moving backwards, opportunities that they have to move forwards. So much so that someone asked me to recount the final drive for the 2-minute drill for the Vikings. And I said, oh, yeah, it started with a couple of penalties where they moved backwards, where it didn't. They actually only went forwards in the final drive. But the memory of them going backwards so often in this game and making things so difficult for themselves was just so strong that I applied it to drives where it didn't even occur.
You're hearing footsteps when you're trying to catch the ball, sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
This isn't gonna work out. So Bailey bails them out. They have the lead going into halftime.
Yeah, technically, right? That's
technically,
it
yes.
Really felt like that for the next 20 seconds.
Yes. So Kirk Cousins takes the snap, fumbles it in a way that I don't think I've ever seen a quarterback fumble a ball. And that is returned for a touchdown. And then then on the clock, it was like 6 or 10 seconds later that Dalvin Cook proceeds to fumble and have that returned for a touchdown by the same player. It was about as surreal a Vikings moment as you can, and hasn't happened in like 70 years is what they were saying in the they were saying in the on the commentary. It was absurd.
Yeah, I think so the back-to-back defensive touchdowns may not have happened in 70 years, but certainly it's never happened by the same player. Which is like,
what on earth? Like I remember just laughing. I remember laughing so hard at the second one. And when Cook was down, and Cook has since claimed that a Panther was twisting his ankle while he was down there, and it's hard to see anything because that's where the scrum was. But that just that moment was like the purest of mania. I was laughing so hard at that second fumble. I was like, I didn't even know how to like.
I was laughing in the press box, like, because there's nothing you can do at that point, right? I just like start laughing, which I'm sure that was like super professional and everything, but like, come on, look at them.
What do you do? It was funny because I couldn't. I just couldn't handle that moment. My wife actually looked at me while I was laughing and like went, "That was some concerning laughter right there." Like you might have just snapped there. I mean, mania is a complicated emotion, to be fair.
This is disturbing, and I work with dead bodies for a living.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. So. And the thing that bothered me the most after those, because the Vikings are definitely no longer ahead by 3 after that. Like that's not what happens. Kirk Cousins immediately starts playing like he's in a panic and can't hit a receiver too. So it's just like, what are you doing right there? Like this is, you have these 2 terrible fumble returns for touchdowns. in a row by the same defensive player. And then Cousins comes out and he looks like he had like severe shell shock after that.
Yeah, which to one end, my initial response is, wouldn't you? But the other part of my response is, yeah, I guess he's paid not to have shell shock in that moment, huh?
there's a price at which you just assume that a player does not have some form of ugly PTSD. I'm surprised. I would be surprised, honestly, if he didn't wake up in the middle of the night on, Sunday night
Jeremy
thinking
Chin.
about exactly. Oh no, it happened again. Oh no, I'm on my back this time. Oh no, it's the first day of school. Like it just all of these terrible things. But yeah, just I'm not saying that I turned off the TV, but I am saying I don't really remember much in the immediate afterwards after that second fumble and Cousins throwing terribly. It's like my brain wanted to protect myself.
Yeah, it really yeah, right. Well, it really felt like the Vikings loss was inevitable, and I think a lot of Vikings fans just turned off their brains just to protect themselves in the same way that you did, because like they're down 11. Yeah, we've seen the Vikings come back from that before. We've seen teams come back from that, but it was just like, yeah, but look at how they're down 11.
Of all things to like, the only more Vikings thing that could have happened would have been the Vikings end up tying up the game and have all the momentum in the world and then have an extra point blocked, which again, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but I about bruised a rib when that, it's like I got up and I wanted to salute a flag. Like that was the most like a moment in my life. I was like, I need, where's the nearest Vikings thing I can salute? Like this is it for me. So after the Cook fumble, and he goes to the sideline and is being looked at, walking as gingerly as humanly possible to get to the sideline. The Vikings managed to block a field goal and start to move on this whole comeback thing. Was that Wanham?
Yeah, that was Wanham. In the press box, somebody, actually, I think the press box announcer said Chris Boyd, so I tweeted that out, and that's like my fault for like listening to people. But yeah, it was DJ Wanham, which man, he is having like a really interesting year. Not just because like we get to contrast like the fact that I didn't like the pick with the fact that he's got some production, but he has now had from scrimmage a game where he's gotten production that you can't really give him credit for with an unblocked sack. A game where he's gotten production against a really bad right tackle, a game where he's gotten production against a decent tackle, and a game where he's gotten stonewalled in this game against actually Taylor Moton's having a really good year, but against a tackle that I don't think a lot of people would put in the upper echelons of offensive players, and he's had more games where it's like, I don't know, but he's had enough games where he's flashed, and then this happens from special teams, and it's just like, man, I don't know. Like, I have no idea kind of what to take it this year. Certainly, I think he's outperforming, fourth rounders typically do at this point. That's really great to see. But man, he's having a super interesting year. I would say, if anything, obviously the trajectory is up, but certainly I don't think we've gotten enough evidence to say that we know that there's something. But man, it is nice to see him just kind of, especially given the Vikings kind of defensive line situation, him just kind of pop off and show up from like moment to moment here. Yeah.
So the Vikings were able to block the kick, which starts their which kind of like kickstarts them a bit, and they were able to. Well, I guess here's the thing, is that there were. I want to mention the ref challenges, because there were so many of them, and it didn't seem like the Vikings would have had to throw at least 2 challenge flags. It seemed like anyway that they shouldn't have been in that sort of position, that there were so many calls that were kind of missed. Was this a poorly refed game, or was this just a couple of instances that just kind of stick out?
In my mind, I think it's a couple of instances stick out. Like, I think the spot that that the Vikings challenged. I thought that, or I guess the first spot that they challenged. That was great that the Vikings were able to get that back, the challenging the incomplete pass ruling. So I actually, I was watching Jefferson on that snap. And so like my binoculars were pointed right at it. And I swear to God that the ball hit the turf before it got to Jefferson. And I said, oh, that's incomplete. I wonder if they're going to give it to them. And so then I look to the ref, and the ref doesn't give it to him. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. And then I see the challenge flag go out. I'm like, oh, they're going to lose that. That's ridiculous. And I look at the replay, and it's like, all right, yeah, credit to you. You got it. And so they were able to get it. But I didn't really feel like the refs were, doing all that poorly. I don't recall many obvious missed penalties that they should have gotten. If you remember any, like, correct me, of course. But I mean, they had a couple that, like the unnecessary roughness on John Miller for Carolina, that, whatever. The face mask penalty I didn't love, but I think you probably have to call that. So I don't think that this was a game where, outside of those challenges, that was necessarily poorly reffed. And obviously the third challenge that the Vikings used, I think the refs were right to have the ruling on the field stand.
I mention it merely because it seems like every Vikings game this year has made some mention about how terrible the refs have been. So the fact that the Vikings did end up in a situation where they had to use so many challenges, it seemed like at least worth discussing it. Because then the refs declared that the Panthers field goal was good.
Right.
Which has turned into a bit of a debate. And somebody had declared, I can't remember who had mentioned it, that it was like the Yanni Laurel debate, kind of depending on like what you actually hear, or that stupid dress that was different colors, where you're just sitting like, can we just talk about something else?
God, I hated that dress so much, man.
And exactly. But lucky for us, Luke Braun has gone and done the math on this, apparently. And according to his math, this was in fact a good field goal. I can trust him on this, but there's also been every couple of years someone reasonably famous makes a comment about why the uprights don't extend further up, and they seem to extend them just a little bit. Like it seems dumb, but this is just one of those things that just it happened again. And it doesn't happen every year, but it happened here, where it's like, did he really make that field goal?
Yeah. So, Luke Braun tweets out a video. It's excruciatingly, it's 1:17 long. Jesus Christ, Luke. All I have to say about that is that at Sam Summers said, "Why do you sound like Ben Shapiro in this? I hate it." Perfect comment, Sam. I've got nothing to add.
So if you would like to see the if you'd like to see the Zapruder, his Zapruder style breakdown of this, where it does not go wide left, you can take a look at it in the show notes. That will definitely be there.
Yeah. As for I actually didn't see any questions on the timeline, but I feel like this always comes up. So there's evidently an engineering or structural reason that you cannot extend the uprights any further up. Either because it causes just enormous amounts of instability, or the uprights will just move too much, and you kind of want those things to stay still, or like it just leads to the possibility of collapse just from size, even if you change the materials. Like there's some sort of physical limit instead of material limit. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I didn't even graduate, but
I should have included that in your eulogy.
Yeah. I failed out of political science. Why are you listening to me on this podcast? The easiest one. I didn't get a comms degree, I'll say that. But wow, sorry guys listening to this. But I mean, Belichick has asked for like laser sights at the top that can tell you and stuff like that. That's I don't know. It seems like a good idea, but.
Well, that's the same conversation people have about, well, why isn't there an RFID chip in the ball to tell us when it broke the plane? And people go, no, that's just because we have that technology doesn't mean we should use it. Just because it would add 1 single gram to the weight of the football. Doesn't mean that we should,
Yeah, I mean, there's like ways around that. I think people talking about that are just like, you're thinking too much. But yeah, I think the RFID chip thing on football placement is interesting because you still have to have a human like determine when the ball stopped or when the play stopped. So you still have to clock the ball, but it still does make things easier if you've got like real-time tracking of where the ball is in geographic space. Either way, yeah, I mean, there's like solutions to this. Someone asked, and I'll just answer this here at this point in the show. Someone asked in the mailbag, "Is that call not reviewable?" And the answer is, it is only reviewable if the ball is below the height of the upright, which is typically not a situation where you would need to review it anyway. But if it's above the uprights, that is a judgment call from the refs. That is not reviewable. I don't know what the reasoning for that is, but that's the rules. I feel like that we say that at least once a year on this podcast. Yeah, I've got no idea what the reason for that is, but them's the rules.
Like, it made sense to someone, and that's what's important here.
Yeah, right.
It made sense to someone.
And they like clearly had a discussion, right? Because the rule explicitly states, it's not implicit, it's explicit. You can review it when the ball is below the level of the highest upright or if it touches an upright. So I guess if the ball like bounces off the upright and up, that's reviewable. But if it's above the height of the upright and it never touches any element of the field, that is not reviewable, and it's explicitly ruled. So they talked it out and decided on this. It's not like, oh, we've interpreted the rules and it turns out it means this. No, they were like, explicitly, we cannot have these be reviewed. Respect my authority.
Exactly. Immediately after the Panthers field goal being quote unquote good, there was a fantastic effort by Jefferson for his second touchdown of the day, and followed up by BC Johnson being his most relevant of 2020 with a 2-point conversion. I'd ask which one was the more impressive play, BC Johnson being relevant or the effort by Jefferson on that second touchdown, but man, that was such a great play by Justin Jefferson.
Oh yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's been a lot of fun to see him kind of like grow in a ton of ways, right? Because like that was his second red zone touchdown, and you didn't, like you said at the beginning, we didn't have the red zone threat. So seeing Jefferson kind of turn into a red zone receiver in addition to all the other stuff he's done between the 20s has been really great. That one was great because it had like basically every element to it, right? I mean, he ran just this insanely good route, shook the defender completely out of his boots, catches it on the out, which he's running like a pivot route, so you have to run basically a slant. But yeah, I mean, he extends through contact in order to get that touchdown, and it puts the Vikings kind of back in contention. After the Vikings had gotten a field goal to close it, and then the Panthers get a field goal to extend it back to an 11-point lead. The Vikings actually get to a point where you might be able to trick yourself into thinking that the Vikings could win. I don't know, really remarkable, because it's just like it's a great route, which is nice on its own, right? Because it gets the Vikings within scoring distance, but then kind of the additional effort to drive through contact to get the touchdown, really phenomenal.
Yeah, and it's starting to be pointed out in like national media now that this is that he's not really a replacement for Diggs, but we're definitely not hurting at receiver the way that people thought we were at the beginning of the year. Like, Justin Jefferson really is having this amazing rookie year, and we are all witness to something that's really cool. So the Panthers then get the ball back and need to start killing some clock because the Vikings are coming back here. The Panthers then start passing the ball inexplicably, stopping the clock before the Vikings can begin their 2-minute drive. This seemed, I want to say a different word than dumb, but one's not coming to me. There were 2 passes on that drive at the very end to stop the clock. The hell are you doing, Panthers?
Yeah, classic 4 minute drill and like almost to a T, right? So they get the ball at 5:31, but they do run the clock all the way down to 4, still in Carolina territory. So this is a 4 minute drill where you've got a lead and you want to run out the clock, and at the end, do enough to kick a field goal and run out the score. So. Yeah, I thought that this was really bizarrely bad clock management. They start out with, a run, and then on second and long, so the run isn't very successful. On second and long, they go right to a pass, which luckily for them is a completion. But already you're kind of seeing that this is getting a little bit odd. That they run the ball a couple more times, great. First and 10, second and 1, first and 10 again. But as soon as it's second and long, they decide to throw the ball. And the thing is, they're doing their job. They're running the clock all the way down to the one before snapping, and they've got the ball with 2:26 left on second and 14 at the Carolina 49. So they're not in a position to be able to kick a field goal. I understand that, but they do have the lead. And for them, what's really important is to be able to get the clock down to the 2 minute warning. And the thing is, it's better for the Vikings to stop the clock before the 2 minute warning. And they've only got one timeout left at this point, and even use the timeout before the 2 minute warning. So you get the free clock stoppage at the 2 minutes, and you get more play flexibility before that 2 minute warning. And so there's like, and people have done the math on this. It's better to have the timeout before the 2 minute than after the 2 minute. And they give the Vikings free timeouts by deciding to throw the ball. And I understand second and long, it's better to convert because then you'll be able to really clock it. But you're near it's 2:26 left on the clock. Run one play and you can get down to the 2 minute warning if the Vikings don't use their last timeout. Run another play and the Vikings have already used their last timeout. You'll get to the 2 minute warning before the punt. So they really have a lot of opportunity here to put the Vikings behind, force the Vikings to use a timeout if they're the type of team, which I think typically they're not, but if they're the type of team to use that timeout before the 2 minute, force them to have a 2 minute drill that is not only exactly 2 minutes, but you've got bad field position because you were able to punt the ball and they're out of timeouts completely, so they can't reserve that. And they don't decide to do it. So 2 incomplete passes, and then they punt the ball. And the Vikings would theoretically have the ability to run 2 plays because they get the ball at 2:18. They would theoretically have the ability to run 2 or maybe even 3 plays before the 2 minute warning, and then have the ability to run their 2 minute offense after that, where they've got a little bit less freedom of movement and not have the ability to kind of run the ball. So really bizarre clock management by the Panthers, which of course almost did not matter.
Because at that particular moment, they punted to a man named Chad Beebe. And boy.
Yeah, so obviously there's a coda to the story that changes it. But at the moment, all I could think of was Beebe has already muffed 1 or 2 punts for the Vikings in his 2-year career with the Vikings. And they moved on from, so it was, what was it, Mike Hughes, then Chad Beebe, and they were like, well, we can't have this anymore. They moved on from Chad Beebe, and they signed Marcus Sherrills, who also muffed 2 punts for the Vikings that year. Like, goodness. But yeah, I mean, they went out and signed Marcus Sherrills because Chad Beebe just wasn't cutting it. And so they decided that KJ Osborne wasn't doing a very good job, and that is a correct assessment. As Matthew Collar points out, the Vikings shouldn't even have a returner back there. They should just sell out to block the punt every single time because they've only ever moved backwards on punts anyway. Their net punt return yardage is negative, and they've also incurred penalties on punts that have moved them backwards. They have not advanced a punt net anyway. And so it is just not worth it to return punts at this point if you're the Vikings. Just try and block the punt. That's how bad it's gotten. And one of those reasons is because they decided to move on from Chad Beebe and go to KJ Osborne. Well, Osborne's not working, so they go back to Beebe, who has had a high drop rate in practices this year and last year, had the highest drop rate in all of the FBS in his final year at Northern Illinois, and has already muffed 2 punts for you. Like, the guy just doesn't know how to hold on to the ball. I say with no knowledge of the events to come. He gets open as a receiver, and that's actually really useful. Like, you can have a high drop rate receiver, and if they're open every time, that's you're going to get some use out of that guy. But yeah, he muffs the ball, and it drops like right, like it's not even like he misplaced it or something altered the trajectory of the ball, and like it hit another Vikings player before it hit. Like it drops right into the breadbasket, like right where he's got his arms to catch it. And cards on the table, if I'm in that situation, I'm absolutely muffing that punt, right? But like he's out there as a punt returner, and one of his things is special teams, and he muffs the punt, and Carolina recovers it, heads up play by them to recover it. They're at the Minnesota 9. That should have been game, right?
I
That
left
should
the
have been
room.
it.
I physically left the room at that particular moment. I don't even remember if I was laughing. I might have been, but I just got up. It's like I need to start walking, because that was one of the dumber things I have seen this year. Is like, nope, I need to not look at the TV for just a moment, let my eyes uncross, and then we'll see what ends up happening. And the
I'm gonna play this out because it's my obligation to watch the rest of this game.
Yep.
But I may not have seen this movie, but I'm a fan of the genre.
Yeah.
Like,
we've seen a variety of Final Destination Vikings games, and this definitely was an interesting twist on it, because you're about to get every single Viking like emotion that you can possibly have in this.
I have seen Saws 1 through 8. Saw 9 is not going to break any new ground for me.
Exactly. So the Panthers hit the field goal, and now Kirk Cousins has to fight history and lead a 2-minute drill to come back to win the game. And has an incredibly efficient 2-minute drive. Too efficient, in fact. And it ends with a Chad Beebe touchdown. Kirk Cousins was carving up that defense like a roast. And it ends with Chad Beebe getting the touchdown and, redemption and all that for a situation he probably shouldn't have put himself in to begin with.
Yeah, well, I would say that Cousins largely played this game pretty well. So, but yeah, a situation he should not have been in. I think you're right. Yeah. So there's kind of this weird thing where teams that are down 3 do worse than teams that are down 4 or down 5, and probably down 6 in 2-minute drills. And initially that seems like really odd. Like, why would that be the case? But the answer is obvious. Teams play too conservative when they know all they have to do is get a field goal, which almost happened to Carolina on the subsequent drive. But there is this kind of thing where unless like you're Seattle, your field, like when you're down a field goal, you just don't really like to push downfield, and you actually lose more games down a field goal than down 4 or down 5. And so there is maybe a sense that there was like a blessing in disguise, and like super deep disguise, right? Like undercover stuff here, because like you needed the Vikings to have a historic red zone moment, which they did, but you couldn't like count on it. And then you also actually needed Carolina to not go for it on 4th down, which a bunch of analytics firms have come out and said they should have gone for it, because they're at the Minnesota 3, right? Either Minnesota is down 3 at their own 3, although technically when you go for it, we saw today that if you go for it on 4th down, you can actually lose like 7 yards. But for the most part, you're going to be probably at the line of scrimmage on a failure. You're at your own 3.
It's the Seahawks thing. It's the exact same situation the Vikings had against the Seahawks.
Yeah, and I guess Matt Rule saw that and was like, not today, I'm kicking the field goal to go up 6, so that if they kick a field goal, which obviously the Vikings wouldn't do, so they're forced to go for it. But yeah, this secures the win, and it forces them to drive an additional 35 yards, which like logically that makes sense, but it turns out, historically that's not borne out, because both teams know that you need the field goal. So they should have gone for it, and they didn't. I don't know that Kirk Cousins has this drive if he's starting from the 2, like that's the difference here. But yeah, so they kick the field goal. The Vikings get the ball at the 25 because it's a touchback, because they don't want to force Amir Abdullah to return the ball, which, if I were them, I'd kind of see what Amir Abdullah's got in the tank, right? Like, he's fumbled enough kickoffs for me to want to, kind of test this out. But yeah, they get a touchback to the Vikings to the ball, and you're right, he carves them, right? Like, he passed deep right to Justin Jefferson, pushed out of bounds 15 yards, pass short right, Chad Beebe runs out of bounds at 6 yards, pass short middle, Kyle Rudolph 7 yards, no huddle. So you've got like a 6 second and a 5 second clock, and then you have to no huddle because you've got it over the middle. But 124 is not a terrible amount of time to have left on the clock now that you've crossed midfield. So it's 124 at the Carolina 47. Pass left to Beebe, he doesn't quite get out of bounds. 103 left at the Carolina 35. Pass deep left to Rudolph. That one is caught. It turns out there was also an illegal contact on that. That's declined. And I think that for half a second in my head, I'm like, well, if they accept the penalty, that stops the clock, right? But no, obviously it doesn't. You're dumb. They've thought of that, and there's even a 10-second runoff. So they were better to take the yards and move Rudolph even closer to, whatever postseason, incentives he has in his contract. And then an incompletion stops the clock with 50 seconds left, 10 yards away. So at that point, the Vikings are in kind of a weird spot where you're thinking, well, if they score right now, that gives Teddy Bridgewater, who is historically actually all right in these situations, a 50-second clock, which I believe they ran out of timeouts because of injury. Oh, no, they just wasted them. And then they actually used a fourth timeout because of injury, which the Vikings also use a fourth timeout because of injury. But they don't have any timeouts left, but it's 50 seconds left, and all they have to do is score a point, right? Which, the Vikings certainly have been in that situation before, right? How much did Russ have left? 47 seconds? It was almost identical, except they've got the ability to run it out from, I guess, the 15 because of a great kick instead of, or the 13 because of a great kick instead of from the 3. The time on the clock ends up being like a really interesting situation. But, someone asks, I think in the mailbag, like, hey, or just asked me outright, actually, I think, hey, did the Vikings mismanage the clock there? And actually, I'm actually pretty sympathetic to that. It's second down. I understand like why you've got to like keep you have to juggle kind of these dual like incentives here. But Miles Gorham responds, you should be thinking touchdown and figure out the rest later. Like the clock is great. And you've got to figure out the touchdown. And I don't know that I'm 100%. You definitely have to get that touchdown if you see the opportunity, but I'm leaning like 90% that. Because if you run the ball and get 4 yards and you're on the Carolina 6 and it's 3rd and 6, how confident are you that the Vikings are going to get that touchdown? The Vikings lead the league in red zone touchdown conversion percentage, but that feels like that is a stat an announcer would say right before they fail, right? Like that's Gary Anderson hasn't missed a kick all year.
And if you're looking at this game, the stat was, well, the Vikings have given up X number of points this season at home, but so far they've blanked the Panthers, and there's 41 yards for the touchdown. Like,
right? Yeah, exactly. So, I think that you're probably right to just score the touchdown and figure it out, because teams are more likely to lose down 1 at their own 15 than they are probably up 1 at their 6 with more time. I don't know if that's true, but I'm nervous, right? So like, I don't know that they should bias themselves towards taking additional time off the clock. So yeah, that happens. The Vikings are tied at the moment, right? It's 27-27. Yes. They're tied. And I remember trying to figure out, do I want to tweet out that that's the go-ahead touchdown? I shouldn't, because anything can happen. But it is really funny because Chad Graff said right before the drive that Chad Beebe is going to score the game-winning touchdown. So I'm just going to get that out there because he said that. And I think that that's kind of funny. And he was right next to me when he said that. So I say that, and then the kick gets blocked, and I'm like, obviously this is my fault.
Like you're immediately taking just note. Yeah, this is my bad. And it turned out that it was offsides.
It was like egregiously offsides too.
Yeah,
like he wasn't a little offsides. Like he was able to get the kick into his stomach. Like that's how offsides he was.
I again laughed maniacally at that particular moment. And then after they okay, yep, accept the penalty, move a little closer. It happens again, but it doesn't happen in a block. It was just that the defender jumped again. Just like, wow, the Vikings have had some terrible special teams moments this year, but they didn't have that at that particular moment. So I suppose I should be happy that Dan Bailey didn't miss that second kick that he had.
I am not convinced necessarily that they weren't coached to ride that line a little bit more aggressively, because all it does is it moves the extra point closer and closer. And like the difference between the kick and a 2-point conversion is nothing, right? Because it's either a 1-point lead or a 2-point lead. So it really doesn't matter how many penalties you incur. If you catch them in a way where the ref isn't going to call the penalty and you get the block, that sets up. So I'm not convinced necessarily that they weren't coached to ride that line, because the penalty doesn't hurt you that much. So maybe it wasn't that bad, but it did set up the Vikings to take the penalty on the subsequent kickoff, which we never see them do anything with. They usually just boot it at the back of the end zone. But here the Vikings actually did something really smart with their special teams, which didn't think I'd say that this year.
Yep, this is where things take an interesting turn, because it's also when the Vikings corners decide to stop playing.
Right, exactly. So yeah, they the Vikings take advantage of the fact that their kickoff coverage is going to be really fast to the ball because it's a short field, and kick it to the Carolina 4. They kick it short, so Trenton Cannon has to pick it up, and he can only run 9 yards because the kickoff coverage is right there because they took the penalty. And I was shocked. Every time I've seen the Vikings take a penalty after the touchdown on the kickoff, they just haven't used it. They haven't decided time for a surprise onside kick, because if we fail recovery, that's not as bad. Or they haven't decided let's kick it short because we've got better coverage or nothing. And obviously you don't want an onside kick here. That would be dumb. But, they haven't ever really taken advantage of the fact that they've gotten an additional, 5 yards or 10 yards to work with. And here they did, because the kickoff coverage would be 5 yards faster. So they did it, and they don't exactly pin the Panthers, but they moved them to 13, which, that's 12 yards better. That's 12 more yards they have to get, which, they probably could have used because they missed a 54-yard field goal at the end. 12 more yards would have been pretty friggin' huge.
So the Panthers were able to move up the field, pretty much like with extreme prejudice. The Vikings corners were not doing
prejudice.
The Vikings were not doing anything to stop them at that point, and it brought them to a moment where they were able to clock the ball and bring out the kicker. It is a missed field goal, wide left. Hilarity ensues. Wasn't even close. A 54-yard miss by Sly.
I mean, I always feel for a missed kick for Sly, but I definitely feel for Sly because he's been half a yard away from setting an NFL record long distance field goal twice, right? And you're like, oh, this guy has kicked 67-yarders essentially twice. And he's perfectly accurate on those two. No dice, I guess. And I don't know, maybe I'll watch that kick again. I have no idea kind of what happened. But prior to that, the biggest problem here was this giant Curtis Samuel gain for about, I want to say 35 yards or something like that. And I looked at the dots, after big replays, they give you the next gen dots. I looked at the dots, and I have no idea what Jeff Gladney is doing here. There is the possibility that the Vikings are running an inverted cover 2, which if you follow any of the X's and O's people on football Twitter, they hate inverted cover two. So what is that? That is when you take a cover two look, and typically that's two high safeties. So cover two, covered shell is two high safeties, and you've got a bunch of defenders either in zone or man coverage underneath. And so that is like one of the most normal things you can do. Teams typically use it a lot in late game scenarios because it gives you, a bunch of defenders deep. It gives you your man defender on the deep receiver, plus you've got your safety in a zone deep too. So you're doubling up. Here, I think the Vikings are and they do invert cover two every so often. This is like not a super unusual thing for them, but here the Vikings, it seems like, drop their corner deep and have their safety drop underneath that. And so that's what the invert comes from, is where the corner and the safety essentially swap, and you've got a corner playing a deep zone and you've got a safety playing a short zone or man coverage, more likely a short zone because you're asking a deep safety to play man coverage otherwise, and that's pretty tough. And so it looks like Jeff Gladney is the deep safety here, and I'm a little bit sympathetic because that means he's asked to cover a deep zone and then he has to pedal over and cover this post route from Samuel. And what's weird is that, so like if you're Curtis Samuel on this play, you're in the slot, you're running a post from the slot, your instruction is to drive directly at if it's cover two, to drive directly at the safety, drive to their outside, and then cross their face on the way in. That's typically the coaching point there. Here, there's no safety. And so he is running a route where there's not a ton of coaching points, which is maybe one of the reasons that you run invert cover two. But Gladney gets so wide, because his landmark is between the numbers and the hash marks for cover two. So he gets so wide here in order to hit his landmark that he just kind of misses the fact that there's a receiver running a post route, which is the whole point of this coverage, is to defend against that receiver. And so he just gets too wide. And there's nobody on him. And that results in deep coverage at midfield. And I think there it would have been easy to be like, well, of course the Vikings don't lose on a muffed punt. They lose on a 2-minute drill that was somehow successful. And then they get beat on the preceding 2-minute drill. And it's tough to be like crazy critical of Gladney here just because he also got hurt on the play. But like Harrison Smith took him out. But like as a coverage receiver, as a coverage defender, it felt like A, the assignment kind of did him dirty a little bit, but B, he didn't do his job within that assignment. After that, the Vikings play, it looks like quarters, and you've got Cameron Dantzler on Robbie Anderson, which Dantzler was not having like an awful game or anything like that, if I recall correctly, but here he just needed to be like much more cognizant of the curl. And here is like something where film review and situational awareness for a young corner is going to be a lot different than for a veteran corner, because the Vikings know that the Panthers have like a kicker with an absolute cannon, and that field goal range for them is it's 10 yards different than it is for a lot of teams. And so after a certain point, receivers are just going to be a lot more comfortable running a curl on a deep route instead of, going vertical or running a dig and running a comeback, because they can sacrifice those extra yards and gain that separation. And Dancer didn't look like he was ready for that curl. And that's not something that you see necessarily the receivers do on film. That's something that as like a veteran corner is a possibility specifically in this scenario. So he's late to attack Robbie Anderson, who gets the ball. 21 seconds left. The Panthers run up and kill the clock for a 54-yard field goal. Now, obviously, with the corner route here, what they would, or a curl route here, what they really want to do is they'd like it to be a little bit more of an accurate throw and turn it into yards after the catch that allows you to get out of bounds and stop the clock and run another play or two. But for the most part, I mean, this was a scenario where Jeff Gladney had a difficult assignment that he didn't execute, and Cameron Dancer had a play that veterans would have a much better handling of than a rookie corner that's missed some games. But yeah, the Vikings corners were put into a difficult situation that's easy to kind of acknowledge, but at the same time they did not do their job, and that nearly lost them the game. And maybe there's a little bit of coaching points that we can talk about here and say, hey, maybe Zimmer shouldn't be doing that, and like maybe have your like pair of all pro safeties like handle more of the load on these deep shots. But yeah, I mean the corners also just didn't do their job. So yeah, that almost should have been game. But yeah, 54-yard field goal missed. Yeah, I've watched this field goal a couple of times now, and I'm watching it again right now as we speak. I don't get it. Like, no one touched it, right?
Nope, no one touched it. Almost looks like he powered too much into it, or like it just like the I don't know if it was like an angle or something, but he just it went. It wasn't even close. There wasn't a single moment that it looked like that was going in.
Well, no, but that's the thing. I don't know that that's true. For the first quarter of a second or half a second, it looked like it was right on line, and then yeah, the snap is good, and then it just it curls like those like bad UFOs in like movies like Plan 9 from Outer Space, like it just curls out, and it's only for like a quarter of a second where it looks like it's going the direction it needs to go, but like yeah, there's a moment where it just and I think it's because I think it's just got to be bad placement, right? The snap is good, the holder gets it exactly where he needs to. And it's more harsh from the end zone angle where it just looks like it takes like a harsh curl. The replay they show from like the sideline doesn't look nearly as sharp. But I think it's because it's bad contact, and so the ball, instead of flipping like end over end, starts flipping like sideways like a saucer, and then it just moves one direction. So yeah, the ball is shaped funny and does funny things.
Yeah, well, once again, it's just proof that it's hard to kick inside of windy I was going to say TCF Stadium, inside of windy US Bank Stadium. It's just how those things go.
Yeah, the winds just pick it up and go. I mean, and it's a strange wind too. It didn't pick up any of the flags on the field goal post that exist for some reason.
Just all about consistency throughout the league. Just all about consistency. Well,
the flags are part of the brand identity.
Oh, you can't mess with that. So obviously we did a deep dive on the game itself. Let's do some quick individual player things here. Kirk Cousins had one hell of a game, and it could be argued has had one hell of a November as well. This is for the most part really good on Kirk Cousins, and you had mentioned at some point, I can't remember if it was last show or the show before, about people with a large number of fourth quarter comebacks being like, well, if you keep putting them in that situation, eventually they're going to end up getting a couple of these. Like the Vikings once again found a situation where they were down and needed a comeback in the fourth quarter, and Kirk Cousins was finally able to help them out.
Yeah, so I think this and the fact that the failed fourth quarter comeback last week was not Kirk Cousins' fault. I think those two combined made me kind of want to reevaluate how bad Cousins is in the 2-minute drill, right? Like we have talked about this endlessly, not just on the podcast, but in articles, and it's been a big part of like Vikings Talk Radio and stuff like that. It's always been a part of the discussion. It's on ESPN, it's everywhere, right? And so Kirk Cousins is not very good in 2-minute drills. You take a look at his, comeback win rate, and it's like 30%. Which is, not the bottom of the league or anything like that. There's a couple of quarterbacks at 0%, depending on how much you want to play with like sample size there. But it's pretty low, right? Like it's as low as before 2018, what Aaron Rodgers' was, which is at 28%. And then he rattled off like 8 in a row or something. Yeah, it was not great, and it was definitely at near the bottom for quarterbacks who had a ton of comeback opportunities and therefore generally pretty good quarterbacks. And that also includes quarterbacks like Andy Dalton, so it's not always like a great quarterbacks or anything like that. But quarterbacks with a lot of opportunities are typically like Hall of Famers that are not behind very often, but they've played so long that they've got a ton of comeback opportunities, or above average quarterbacks that have been on bad teams, or average quarterbacks that have been on okay teams that are in a bunch of close games a lot. So like Andy Dalton. And so his win rate has not been very high. I've criticized the mechanics of how he goes about these, both at halftime and in the 2-minute drill. And I wanted to say, well, hold on. What if we didn't know what Kirk Cousins' history was in Washington? What if we didn't know what his history was the past 2 years with the Vikings? What if we just took a look at what he's done in 2-minute situations with the Vikings this year? And with that frame of mind, and I'm not saying that is a legitimate lens of analysis, right? Because like all of that other stuff kind of informs how we should think of Cousins and his ability to do it in the future. But if we just looked at what he did in 2-minute drills this year, or go ahead situations this year, how was he done? And the answer is pretty well. Like, so the Dallas game, he has 3 accurate throws, first down, second down, third down. One is dropped. One's a contested catch that, nevertheless hits the receiver's hands and hits the ground. And then a not so great fourth down, right? Like, he scrambles against, non-existent pressure, chucks it deep. It's kind of inaccurate. Someone points out, Thielen might have needed to have been somewhere else, but he lost a shoe. So, maybe there's something there, but whatever. Let's say that that's Kirk Cousins' fault. I would say that there's not a quarterback in the league where even in their successful fourth quarter comebacks have been 100% great from down to down to down in their comeback opportunities. The most famous, Vikings comeback of all time, what the Minneapolis Miracle, was an inaccurate throw, right? And so for us to hold Cousins to the standard where he needs to be 100% accurate on all throws is an impossible standard that even elite quarterbacks don't hit, right? Again, Aaron Rodgers has had historically not a great comeback record, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But I wrote a piece about this, and I said, hey, if we acknowledge that Cousins not only had a brilliant game against Dallas, but actually did all right in the 2-minute drill and was victimized by a drop, and Adam Thielen, one of the best contested catch receivers over the past couple of years, losing a contested catch opportunity. What should we think about him? And I know Phil Mackey tweeted out, well, his passer rating in the final 4 minutes with in tied or one score situations is like 64 or something like that. And I was like, well, he did have one interception, but let's take a look at that interception. It was the Titans game. He threw a perfect pass. It hit Adam Thielen in the hands, and then it bounced off of his hands into his chest, and then up into his helmet, and then off, and then Amani Hooker intercepts it. What's Kirk Cousins supposed to? It was a brilliant throw. It was 4th and 24 from the Vikings 20. 4th and 24 from the Vikings 26. Like, you're hoping to, and there's a minute left, 58 seconds left, I think, when Hooker comes up with the ball and it's Titans ball. So there's like a minute 9 left at the beginning of the play. Pressure comes, and this time he's scrambling away from pressure. It's not like against the Cowboys where it was phantom pressure. Pressure comes, and he moves away, and this should not be completed. And he fits the ball perfectly into this tight window to get right to Adam Thielen in triple coverage, and he gets punished in the stat sheet with an interception. Like, okay, so he doesn't get credit, but he did get the go-ahead touchdown against Tennessee. And this is Krauserific, who follows me on Twitter and sometimes submits questions to the show, and then also I steal content from him all the time. Follow him at Krauserific. He mentioned that. That actually, I didn't even bring up the fact that Kirk Cousins was the go-ahead touchdown scorer in the Seattle game and the Tennessee game. So, and the defense gives up the subsequent score, forcing another comeback drive where Cousins actually does all right. So in the Seattle game, I actually said that the Vikings drove to the 6, and they failed on the subsequent run. Probably should. Crossrefect points out that I probably shouldn't be too enthusiastic about bringing that one up because it was only runs on that drive. But on the previous, it's not a big deal because on the previous drive, Kirk Cousins did lead a go-ahead touchdown drive, and so that would have been marked as a game-winning drive in the like the Pro Football Reference, game-winning drive, fourth quarter comeback, stat sheet. And so here's the situation where Cousins hasn't been the best quarterback in the NFL in comeback situations this year, but he's been really good in a lot of these situations. And other things have happened. We've gotten drops from Adam Thielen. We've gotten drops from Justin Jefferson. We've gotten them turned into turnovers. He has a comeback situation with 15 seconds left. Like, I've seen Aaron Rodgers in comeback situations with 15 seconds left, and I remember when he's won them, but he's lost a lot more of those than he's won them. Right? The wins are memorable, but the losses happen, and they happen a lot more frequently. And so I don't really want to hold this 15-second comeback that he doesn't, mount against him. And so it's just like, okay, historically, he's actually not been very good in these situations, right? Like, great with 6 minutes left, he gets the game-winning drive against the Denver Broncos. Great against in overtime against the Saints, he gets the go-ahead score, the game-winning drive. And the Saints one is a little bit difficult because he was not playing well in the fourth quarter there, and so that allowed the Saints to get back into it. So it's like you lose a little, you gain a little. That was also the game where my take was Adam Thielen, who ends up scoring the touchdown that ties the game for them, might have hurt the Vikings more than helped. Obviously, at the end, we remember the scores more than we remember the failures because the score happens at the end. But Cousins wasn't doing a great job in the fourth quarter of that game, and so you can say that was a failed fourth. But he leads the final drive in overtime when it's clutch, and benefits maybe from offensive pass interference from Kyle Rudolph. Who knows? Depends on if you ask a Saints fan. And gets the touchdown. He throws that ball and it's great. He leads the Vikings into, I guess, disaster on the next game. But, he had a couple of moments last year where you can say, well, it's not like a lost cause. He also had a couple of moments last year where, he had an opportunity to win and he doesn't do it. He misses open receivers and stuff like that. And so, he wasn't great in 2-minute drill last year, but he had a couple of moments. He wasn't great in 2-minute drill in 2017 or 2018. 2018 with the Vikings, 2017 with Washington. And so he's got this history where it's easy to criticize him, but mostly we're criticizing the history when we bring up the Cowboys game, because I think, you can't really, like, what's he supposed to do differently in the Cowboys game? Like, yeah, play the fourth down a little bit better, but, the first, second, and third down were great. So, like, yeah, I don't know. So the thesis of my piece is, if Cousins is an average comeback quarterback at this point, that's a massive upgrade over where we thought he would be. And if he is great at like stuffing the box score, between first and second quarter, not third quarter, the Vikings are just bad at third quarter, but first and second quarter, and he's average at comebacks. Now you've got like a situation where you've got an offense that can actually lead you to some wins. Like, obviously offenses can lead you to wins by scoring points right away, but you want them to be able to score points, on demand as well. And they've got that capability potentially now. So I think the Carolina game brings up the question of whether or not Cousins has turned a corner in this regard. And that's where the Aaron Rodgers example is really interesting. Like, obviously Cousins is not Rodgers, who is like the most dangerous quarterback in the NFL. But Rodgers was bad at comebacks and then godlike at them. Part of that is he was let down by the defense. He scored 11 go-ahead touchdowns in some of these losses that the defense ends up allowing the response score. A little bit of that is on Rodgers for not managing the clock a little bit better. Betts at all 22 pointed out that one reason that Tom Brady is better at comebacks than Peyton Manning is not because Peyton Manning does not play as well in comeback situations in terms of getting yards, but that Brady manages the clock better in comeback situations. He always understands where you are in game flow, whereas Manning just is kind of pushing the ball a little bit more. And that might have been an issue with Rodgers that he might have solved. Like, it's not necessarily entirely on the defense. Like, he scored too fast. Like, we had that discussion when we were talking about it in the game. But like, if Cousins is maturing, and we know that quarterbacks late in the career seem to be able to do that, to be able to mature specifically in 2-minute drills, and he is like 8th or 7th or 6th in a bunch of these quarterback metrics, like 5th in PFF grade, 6th in EPA per play. If you've got an offense that can score some points at the beginning of games and an offense that's got a reasonable amount to come back, now I think you've got a better discussion about whether or not the Vikings can kind of, go 5-1 for the rest of the, or 6-0 or whatever, or what are we at, 4-1 and 5-0? Jesus. They've got the ability to potentially run the table here and push for a playoff spot. So I think now you've got an ability to really have that discussion. Whereas like before, it was always just kind of like, technically the pieces are there. Now it feels like that we can kind of open up this conversation now that we've seen a 2-minute drill, that, the elements are there. I think it's different, right? The elements are there as opposed to the pieces are there.
Well, we're running a little bit long, but I did want to just quick mention something that seems to be missing this year especially, but this game especially, was the pass rush by the Vikings. It appears to be non-existent.
Yeah. Uh, the defensive line that could now couldn't or can't. And that was an issue, obviously, in the Dallas game as well against a much worse offensive line. Not that this offensive line for the Panthers is like remarkable. The interior has a lot of problems. We covered that in the interview with Billy previewing the game. But yeah, I mean the Vikings got like what, 2 pressures from their top defensive line. It looks like we got 4 from Afadi, but otherwise 3 pressures from Jalen Holmes, 2 from Harrison Smith, who's not even a defensive lineman, 2 from DJ Wanham. But yeah, just 14 total pressures all game, and more importantly, the percentage of snaps that Teddy Bridgewater, who holds on to the ball longer than almost any other quarterback in the NFL, not named Cousins. The total amount of snaps that he was under pressure, despite holding onto the ball a ton and inviting pressure, was about 30%. And a lot of those came very late into the snap that were caused mostly by Bridgewater and less by kind of the Vikings defense, or you could say by the coverage, right? Then by the Vikings defensive unit. So yeah, just a pretty poor showing from a pass rush perspective.
All right, well, let's wrap this one up and talk about something that's incredibly important in the NFL this week, or for the past week or so now, is the COVID situation in the NFL, because the game for the Steelers and and for the Ravens has been moved at least 3 times now
to Wednesday, which means we're going to get a game every single day of the week.
This season, it's fantastic, or crazy. Let's go with crazy.
Let's go with crazy, but like an interesting trivia question, hopefully 20 years down the road.
I laughed so hard when they showed the graphic on the screen saying that it was going to be on Wednesday, and that it was something like time and network subject to change, and I just went, yeah, no kidding. Like, I think I even tweeted out at some, right? Yeah, it was like, I think I tweeted out at some point to Eric. It was like, just put it at week 18. I was like, nope, screw it. Do it tonight. Like, there's no what at this point. What's holding you back from just saying, no, what, we're doing it tonight? And if you guys do an off strike, then we'll deal with it. But yeah, just play now. This was kind of the week that the worst case scenarios started happening, and we thought things were bad when the Titans were the most hated team in the league because of how they may or may not have ignored COVID protocols and all that. This was a week that Denver didn't have a starting quarterback because of COVID. And as a result, the quarterback completed one pass and had more interceptions. Was it just 2 or was it 3? I missed that.
Well, he completed 1 pass, had 2 interceptions, but had 3 dropped, which on 9 attempts to have 5 interceptable passes. Well, I feel for him.
You feel for him, but this isn't the job he signed up for. So, I mean,
right.
And we learned a few things too, including that the league does not want to let an assistant coach then be upgraded to the active roster in order to have a quarterback for the game, which the Vikings discovered 2 years ago, I believe, with the corner situation.
Yeah, and in the Vikings situation, they checked before the season started, before they like made the move to make Terrence Newman a coach. So it wasn't like they were like, we're running out of corners. Terrence Newman, can you suit up? That's not allowed. They like knew, right? And so this is a situation where if Newman wanted to play, he would have to essentially finish out the season off a roster or, as a coach, right? And then essentially re-enter the player pool as a player and hit the books. So that was something that the Vikings knew a couple of years ago when Terrence Newman decided to take a coaching position, which gave Holton Hill and Chris Boyd more of an opportunity to make the roster, which I guess in hindsight, really fantastic foresight from Newman and the Vikings. Not that Holton Hill has been like wonderful or had been until injury, but he's an important asset to have, and then Chris Boyd has been getting a little bit better. So a couple of things. One, I think the league office is correct to deny the Denver Broncos the ability to have their assistant, who last played in 2012, the ability to play quarterback, which, that tells you a lot about what they thought, and I guess were eventually proven right on of Kendall Hinton's quarterbacking ability. I mean, in college, he was asked to switch to receiver, right? Like this wasn't like, hey, we love your athleticism. We don't think that you're an NFL quarterback, but you played well in college. No, in college, he was asked to switch to receiver, right? So they were like in dire straits at that point, and so they wanted somebody that had played kind of a traditional offense and could throw the ball, play quarterback. Which can you imagine? You stop playing for like 8 years, and yeah, you've got constant access to a gym, so you're probably in shape. But like,
well, it's just like falling off a bike.
Yeah,
not riding
nobody's
it, falling off of one.
Just falling, right? Yeah. But yeah, and the reason obviously is that teams have the ability to circumvent roster and salary cap limits by stashing players as like low-level assistant coaches and then activating them essentially for games. So I understand league precedent there. Second thing I kind of want to say is, people are asking like, hey, why is it that the Broncos game wasn't delayed, but the Ravens-Steelers game was delayed? And why was the Steelers-Titan game delayed? And I think the answer is pretty obvious when you think about the Ravens and Titans situation, is that there was an ongoing outbreak that they didn't know when it was contained. Whereas with the Broncos, there was no outbreak. One person tested positive, and then the other 3 were put onto the reserve list because of contact, but had never tested positive, right? And so there was no outbreak. And the issue that the NFL is concerned about when it comes to making a decision about whether or not to delay a game is whether or not there is a risk of an on-field contagion from team to team. That is the decision that they're making. And so that is why they would delay a game based off of the outbreak that occurred at the Ravens, where they had multiple positive tests over the course of multiple days. Same thing with the Titans. And possibly would have people that would test negative, that there was a relatively high risk of somebody who would test negative the day of and nevertheless be contagious. That is not the scenario that they were presented with the Broncos. So that's the rubric that they made. So the second thing that people bring up that I think is a pretty decent argument is, well, okay, or there's 2 things people bring up. One, well, you're still putting a terrible product on the field. Like, this is just like really awful football to watch, which is true, but like is debatable also. Like, I had a lot of fun watching that game. I mean, again, I feel really bad for Kendall Hinton. Like, I was cheering for him, but I knew that was pretty unlikely because they wanted to play a UCF quarterback from 2012 instead. But I enjoyed myself. But yeah, it's a poor product to put on the field. I think that sets a bad precedent because you could delay games for like whatever reason. And that would essentially just be delaying games to give someone a competitive advantage. But the second one I'm sympathetic to, which is that this actually hurts player safety in another way, having somebody who doesn't play quarterback. And I strongly agree with that. I think that could severely impact player safety. But the thing is, that puts the league in a position where they have to say, okay, you've had an entire position group, test positive or whatever. We have to make a decision about which position groups are important enough to delay and which ones aren't. And like, okay, you don't have enough receivers. Well, that's not important enough to delay a game. But defensive ends, yeah, absolutely, we got to delay. And now you're in a difficult spot where you have to predefine kind of where you're going to do. So that's tough. I still would have delayed the game because of player safety concerns. But I think that there's a stronger argument here than people realize. So I wanted to say that as well. But yeah, feel bad for Kendall Hinton. I hope he becomes like an all-pro receiver, man. That's a lot to go through.
There are those in the tinfoil hat community who believe that the league was trying to make an example of the Broncos as well.
I don't think so. I think they just followed their own protocol that's pretty well defined at this point.
So let's go to the mailbag. And the first question is from our donor this week. So we're going to go right to Benjamin, who asks, and this was admittedly sent before the Cousins 2-minute drill. Says, seems like the Vikings/Cousins are awful at executing 2-minute drills, whether that's play calling, Kirk's decision making, or both. Compare this to Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, who seem quite capable of managing the clock and putting themselves in position to score with even just a minute to work with. I was wondering if there was actual data to back this up more than my own biased experience. Maybe a measure of clock time between plays or average position yards gained, EPA, WPA, or something else I haven't thought of. Are the Vikings/Cousins actually as bad as I think they are at it?
So this requires a little bit more research than to be able to answer in a mailbag. And I kind of wish I saw this before I wrote my piece, because then I would have been able to incorporate it. I'm sorry, Benjamin. But I will tell you what measures I would probably use. And I think it would be a lot easier. I would just say, look at time remaining at the end of drives for quarterbacks, and kind of segment it out. Look at kind of the average amount of time these drives take on successful drives, and evaluate Russell Wilson and who chews up the most clock, essentially, relative to how much time one would expect them to chew based off of field position on scoring drives in this, which is a small sample, but I think you can do it. And then the second measure I would use is win probability added. I did talk about how some quarterbacks seem to be better at this than others, not an observation I made, but one that Adult 22 made. And I would argue that the Vikings are probably not at a stage where they've got the ability to do that effectively. And I think it's just because they're at a stage where they just kind of want their offense to score some points, and they can't really worry about they're not good enough yet to worry about the context in which they score those points, right? Like, yeah, Wilson and Rodgers do a really great job of both managing the clock and scoring points, which requires not only a lot of talent, but a lot of confidence and also a lot of experience in those situations. The Vikings want to be able to score points, which they're already struggling, and then they'll tackle that other stuff later. So I think your intuition is correct. I can't say for sure, but I do know how I would probably measure this if I took the time to answer this a little bit more in full.
Draw Play Dave asks, why do the Vikings hate me personally?
Well, you answered this draw play, Dave. You said the Vikings were your second team.
It is true. In fact, he had actually expressed that to me as well when we were going over stuff for the logo. So this really is your own fault here. Raul asks, in what round do the Vikings draft a punt returner?
Fifth, obviously. It's always the fifth round.
Always the fifth round. Tampa Bay Vipers for Life asks, since returning punts clearly isn't Chad Beebe's strength, and with his increased workload on offense, who is a viable option on the roster or the practice squad?
So my intuition is to say that there isn't one, because I don't think they would willingly put Beebe back there based off of his history, because he did muff some punts for the Vikings. But I looked really briefly. I did not look up every single skill position player's history of returning, but I remembered Alexander Hollins returned some kicks, so I looked up to see whether or not he returned some punts. It turns out he did not return any punts in college. I looked up a couple more players, and none of them had returned punts in college. So nobody, as far as I can tell, but I did not do a super deep dive into that. I would say that the evidence suggests that they wouldn't have anybody, because they probably would have used them before Chad Beebe in that critical situation. No, but they might sign somebody like tomorrow, at least to the practice squad, and maybe think about that, because if Beebe is taking up space, like, he's obviously the third receiver, and they needed him, quote unquote, needed him because Adam Thielen was out, so they were gonna do that anyway. But like, they deactivated KJ Osborne and activated Tajay Sharp. That's a free spot if you're not going to activate. If you're not going to activate KJ Osborne anyway, you don't need to activate Tajay Sharp. And so they could probably just like find the best punt returner available, which I actually listed a bunch of them in my previous mailbag, which I'll link in the show notes, that are available. You can either sign someone from another practice squad and sign them to your roster. There's also a couple of free agent players with punt return capability. And this was in response to a question of whether or not they would sign Marcus Sherrills. I still think the answer is no. It does feel a little bit more likely now, though.
Next question is from Sideward, who asks, how real is the playoff dream here? I can't wrap my head around all these tiebreakers and scenarios. Do you see the NFL playoffs expanding this year?
They are doing everything they can to prevent cancellations, and the scenario in which they expand from 7 to 8 per conference is if games get canceled. The second question then, of course, is, do those games only count within conference? So, for example, if the Steelers-Ravens game gets canceled, which maybe just do that.
Like, as of recording, has not happened yet.
Right. Yeah. I want to make that clear. Would it only be an 8th spot available to AFC teams? That's interesting, right? And if it's an AFC-NFC, matchup, maybe an 8th spot gets available to both. If it's an NFC only, it's an 8th spot only available to the NFC. I don't know kind of what rules they hashed out there were, but I think they only expand in a scenario where they cancel games, and they are trying so hard to not cancel, as we can see, to not cancel games. They're pushing up against the limit to the point where you're getting games running into Thursday, right? Like into the next week, almost. So we'll see if the Ravens have any more positive tests. I think they just have to cancel that game at this point. Yeah, but I don't know if that's going to apply to the NFC. As for the next question, wrapping your head around all the tiebreakers, that's really tough. I'm still going to plug a piece that Chad wrote for The Athletic about that, about how to navigate all those tiebreakers. But, bottom of the barrel, like lowest level analysis, 538 says the Vikings have about a 30% chance to make the playoffs. So that's probably it. I'm guessing Football Outsiders say that the Vikings have. Actually, I just got a free Football Outsiders account. That's what you get for being media. Haha. I'm rolling in the riches here. But I'm guessing that, and just click on the playoff odds report. I'm guessing that the Football Outsiders is lower on the Vikings. Let's see. Total 18%. So yeah, they're way lower. 30% by 538, 18% by Football Outsiders. I'd say it's probably closer to 30% than 18%, but that's something to consider. So either a 1 in 5 or a 1 in 3 chance. If you want to split the difference, it's a 1 in 4 chance. Your brain is not very, and it's not because of you, it's because it's a human thing, but brains are not very good at processing that. So it is a chance. That's what you get.
Yeah, that's about right. Luke Braun asks a question that Mike Zimmer ended up answering today in a presser. If the whole QB room got COVID, who would play QB for the Vikings?
So my instinctive answer was Adam Thielen. It turns out that is the player that the Vikings have designated for that. And the reason I answered Thielen was, do you remember him in the Pro Bowl skills competition out throwing Trubisky?
I sure do. That was one of your finer moments.
Yeah. Incredible. I just, that was so good. I'm going to link that video in the show notes, because if I don't get to celebrate that, what do I get to celebrate? But, I got to treat myself. But that makes a lot of sense, just because I've seen a bunch of these players throw in camp, and Adam Thielen's got a more accurate and better arm than a ton of them. So it's Adam Thielen. Obviously, Adam Thielen was not available for this game because he was on the COVID-19 protocol. So who would it be after that? And the Vikings answered to Kyle Rudolph, which, I don't know what to make of that, because at least with Kendall Hinton, you had like some running ability, which they tried to use a little bit of. But with Rudolph, who I guess is a yak god, you're probably not relying on that as much. You just kind of wanted to throw it. At least he could take some hits.
Well, I mean, he is an athletic tight end, so there is that.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
Matthew asks, when Ezra comes back healthy, which two are we starting, and at what position out of Ezra, Dakota, and Brett?
Yeah, so Brett Jones, Dakota Dozier, Ezra Cleveland. I would say you should start Brett Jones and Ezra Cleveland. Not that Brett Jones had an amazing game, but you're probably going to get Brett Jones moved back to, just based off how the Vikings do this stuff all the time. You're probably going to get Brett Jones back as a backup. Dakota Dozier had a worse game than Jones. Jones didn't have a great... Oh, this is great. Okay, yeah, so I just looked at the PFF score. So I agree with PFF that Brett Jones should be charged with the sack that was given up, but I also think that was an insanely difficult assignment, and I wouldn't downgrade him too much, and it looks like that's exactly what PFF did. They charged him for the sack, but they didn't hurt his pass protection score too much. Dakota Dozier definitely had a worse game. So I would say Brett Jones is your best right or left guard. I would play him at left guard, and but actually, you know what? You get to choose, right? And Ezra Cleveland's going to be the left tackle of the future. See if Ezra Cleveland can play left guard. He's played on the left side for most of his life, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue. But yeah, Ezra Cleveland left guard, Brett Jones right guard. If you're too worried about that, Brett Jones plays center, so you can play both sides. So Brett Jones left guard, Ezra Cleveland right guard. That's what I would say, but I think it's going to be Ezra Cleveland, Dakota Dozier. God, Dozier was so bad. 2 consecutive games of him just being awful.
Ugh. Hunter Sorensen asks, should the blame for special teams gaffes be placed more on the young, inexperienced players or the coaching of Maloof?
Both. I think my initial reaction is to say Marwan Malouf because it's like, you have enough gaffes from enough people and it just sounds like a coaching problem. Um, but, Malouf obviously has a ton of input on which special teamers he's got available to him. But I mean, like, Spielman picked up Chisna and Chisna is like not situationally aware. So, like, what is Malouf to do? The Vikings decided to keep Chisna on the roster, and Malouf, that's what he's working with. They've got a guy without any hands in BB and a guy without any return instincts in Osborne. What's the coach to do? That said, obviously, the coaching has been really suboptimal on special teams, and not just it's not just because we saw Zimmer yelling at Marwan Malouf or anything like that. It's been really bad. So he clearly deserves a significant amount of blame on a lot of these gaffes. Um, Coaching Chisna to not dive back into the end zone and attempt to catch a punt that your own team kicked instead of just tapping it back into play. I don't know that you can do that. I think that that's just like you tell them what the rules of the game are and then they have to execute that. But like all these like block in the back penalties and stuff like that, like Chris Boyd, for example, like that sounds like a coaching problem.
Next question is from Brett, who asks, which Kirk was better, Kirktober of 2019 or 2020 Kirk Vember?
So Kirk Vember has the advantage of having those 2-minute drills to his name. But both statistically, just in terms of like yards per, it was like it's 10-1 to 12-1 in terms of touchdown interception ratio. But the yards per attempt was significantly higher in Kirktober. And based off of my memory, Kirktober was just a lot better. Maybe it's because it was like bombs away and it was an exciting Vikings offense for like the first time in a decade. But maybe it's like a Stephon Diggs bias I have, but like I recall Kirktober being a lot better. So I looked up the PFF grades through those 4 games in October versus these 4 games we've had in November, and they were significantly higher. But I shouldn't say like significantly higher in the sense that like they're blown away, but it's just like in it, like the top grade from October is better than the top grade from November. The second is better than the second. The third is better than the third, and so on. So like clearly, I think in most respects that you can evaluate it, it's better. But Kirk's season this year has been better than it was last year because how bad he was at the beginning of the year last year was way worse than how he was at the beginning this year, because like how he did against Green Bay last year was way worse than how he did against Indianapolis this year, which I think was his worst game. And then how he did against Chicago last year was really bad, but it was probably worse, than how he did against Green Bay this year. So like his lows are not nearly as low. His highs maybe are not as high, but they're a lot closer. And then I guess we'll see, because he had the game against Green Bay again, whereas we'll see kind of what he does against Green Bay coming up on the schedule in the future. But like, or no, I guess no, they already had the game against Green Bay. His first game against Green Bay wasn't awful, so it wasn't great, right? And most of his,
it was bloated by garbage time, but yes,
it was bloated by garbage time. Yeah. I was about to say that it wasn't great, and you get to add all that stuff in the fourth quarter, but like it wasn't as bad as those games against Green Bay last year, is what I'm trying to say. So, with the Green Bay games out of the way, where they always seem to have the Vikings number, and the fact that they haven't yet had a performance as bad as Chicago last year or Green Bay last year, either Green Bay game last year, you don't have the same floor necessarily. I mean, that Atlanta game was like brutally bad for the Vikings this year, but, and this is going to sound so dumb, but aside from the picks, which are important, I want to acknowledge that, aside from the picks, his throw-to-throw performance wasn't as bad as some of the throw-to-throw performances he had last year. So Kirk might be better, but Kirktober was best.
Next question is from Jeremy McGee, who asks, playing without Thielen would seem to be a good test of Jefferson's ability to be a true number 1 receiver. What can we learn about the rookie's fit for this role, given his performance against the Panthers?
I want to dive deeper into this and get a better look, but I don't think we learned a ton in that respect. Like, it's great that he was able to catch 7 passes. He didn't take over the game or anything like that. He got a ton of targets. He didn't convert all of them, and it was unfortunate because some of that was his fault. Like he had a sideline catch that I thought he would have made, and that typically Thielen and Diggs make. Like obviously neither of them make it 100% of the time either, but that's a catch that I've seen Thielen and Diggs both make a ton, and it would have been nice for him to make. But yeah, I wouldn't count it as a huge knock. I thought he did well. I thought the Vikings did a great job distributing the ball well. I think that what was it? I think BC Johnson said after the game that all the receivers that played grew a lot during the game, and it's kind of a narrative play that I typically avoid, but honestly, that's like not too false or anything like that. So I thought the receiver core in general did a pretty good job, especially after BC Johnson learned how to get past the sticks. That was pretty great. So I guess that counts as in-game growth because he wasn't doing that, and then he was. And then BC Johnson was catching passes. That's like nice. So yeah, I think the receiver core overall, I'm not going to say proved that they can sustain a long-term receiver injury or anything like that, but proved that maybe it wouldn't be as disastrous as we think. And Jefferson played well, which is good because there was every opportunity that without Thielen there, he would just see unmitigated additional attention that he just would kind of wilt under that. He didn't do that. So that's good news.
Next question from Ian Pauley, who asks, what shocking way will they utilize to lose to the Jags? Feels like special teams miscues has been done before.
A couple of times, right? They've had, punt blocks, and they've had the muffed punt more than once, I want to say. Although this is the first time they didn't recover a muffed punt. I don't remember. So, there's that. We still have yet to see Amir Abdullah fumble a return, which, he's known to do. So that's in the cards, of course. But if we wanted to avoid special teams, and obviously kind of long snapping is still on the table, although we've seen that as well. Yeah, I would say just kind of like weird bounce the ball type stuff. Like, for example, something crazy I could totally see happening in a Vikings game is you throw a ball to Justin Jefferson, it hits his hands, clatters off, hits a ref, and bounces directly into a defender's hands. What are you supposed to do about that? And then it becomes a pick six. Like, that feels like couldn't you see that happening?
Nope, could totally see it. I'm going to take a page out of the Falcons book for just a moment, and not this year's Falcons. I can't remember if it was the year before or the year before that, where the Falcons were down. They proceeded to score a touchdown, so they were ahead, and then they threw a pick two on the 2-point conversion that was run back. Good. So they ended up at the end of it at a net loss. They ended up down after scoring the touchdown to take the lead. So
that's a pick one, I think, if you return it for a score. But yeah.
So yeah, I'm gonna go with that. I think that's the one thing we haven't seen in 2020 that it's really aching for at this point. It just really needs it.
Actually, also, I've decided that if we wanted to avoid a special teams one entirely, I think instead of the weird one where a pass hits a referee and it becomes a pick, which again, totally possible. I actually really like the Vikings losing to a hook and ladder / crazy lateral, the 0.1% of the time this works out. Just one of those where they're lateraling constantly and it just looks like a dead play. And, they need like 7 points, but they're backed up at their own 10 and there's 1 second left. So you can't do a Hail Mary. One of those plays where the Vikings actually find a way to lose to that. Ooh, I see that.
That's rough. Kurt Marsh asks an interesting question. If the Washington football team makes it to the playoffs, will there ever be another team lacking a name and a winning record to make the playoffs?
Yeah, so before the show, I was like, obviously not. You would need a team motivated to change their name. And there's like fewer and fewer teams that want to do that and would do so as a result of an unusual amount of popular movement surrounding the social issue that surrounds the nature of the name change and an internal crisis that they would need to distract from. And as I was describing what was happening with Washington, like, there was a great social movement about racism as well as internally a sexual harassment campaign. I was saying this out loud before the show, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, never mind. That'll happen again.
Yeah.
So I want to say on face, no, but, I can't rule that out. Like, that seems like way too confident to rule out, but probably not, both at the same time. That seems pretty unlikely. We haven't had teams without names before. How likely are we going to have that again? But, modern copyright environment, it takes a while to get a team name in there. You need someone to panic and change the name really quickly. Like if we decide that it's not just the Chiefs mascot that people dislike, but the Chiefs name, or if we decide that gold mining is not something that we should celebrate because it's kind of an awful time in American history, so they should not be called the 49ers anymore, or whatever. By the way, these are not opinions I actually hold, but I could totally see like movement in that direction. Like I think we should get rid of the Chiefs mascot, but the Chiefs name, whatever, the 49ers name, I don't care. But I think that maybe, right? Like maybe we're at a point where we're just like, yeah, the gold rush was a little genocidal. Maybe we shouldn't do that. At the same time, the 49ers have an internal crisis. Okay, we'll change it to the San Francisco football team. And that year they're good enough or the division is bad enough for them to be able to make. So it's like possible, but there's like fewer and fewer teams where this becomes likely.
Next question is from Don from Ohio, who asks, the fiance and I have decided on Hawaii as our spot to get married. I'm really just including this so that you are aware where this is happening, Mr. Best Man. The fiance and I have decided on Hawaii as our spot.
Guardian Angel.
Yes. / Guardian Angel have decided on Hawaii as our spot to get married and the honeymoon. While looking at packages, we noticed Airbnbs are a less expensive route if we want a place by the ocean. We've never used Airbnb before. Do you recommend them? Don ended up getting 1 million recommendations on Twitter for this.
In the replies, and I'm sure those are great. Here's my thing. One, I've used Airbnb a ton, especially for like game day travel and stuff like that before the Athletic decided to like systematize everything. I have largely had really excellent Airbnb experiences. Two, I don't want to take any risks during my wedding, like or honeymoon. Like even if I had 100% hit rate on Airbnb and I'm at like 95, 98%, like I've had almost universally great experiences with great, whatevers. And I usually try to pick super hosts and I try to pick, guys with a ton of reviews and stuff like that. Even so, I just don't want there to be opportunities for a screw up. And I'm just going to hand that over to a company instead of a person. So I recommend Airbnb in general. I probably don't want to do that unless there's like some travel package that includes specifically Airbnb. And so there's like a travel agency that's like handling this, but like someone needs to be held accountable. That's just like not some dude living next door to the space they're renting out. So like, I would say generally no, unless you notice that there is a corporate presence that is well reviewed and those reviews they're not like making up their own fake reviews and there's some kind of paper trail that you can hold them accountable to, not that you would want to, but so that they know that they can't screw up. So I would say don't use an Airbnb, despite my really positive experience using a ton of Airbnbs. That said, if you do decide to go with an Airbnb, absolutely pick a super host. People who have a strong track record of being available, of advertising a space correctly, of giving you kind of the experience that you want, and having a lot of experience with a lot of people telling them that they've done a really good job with their property. So that's what I would say in those scenarios. But I would say avoid an Airbnb for a wedding.
Agreed. Although when I was in, I think it was Seattle, my Airbnb, for whatever reason, the heat didn't work that like for one of the days, and he ended up just up and refunding me either 1 or 2 of the days I was there. Just like, sorry about that.
Oh, that's nice.
I'm still working on getting it fixed. Apologies. And he was a super host, and he had other people staying in the place too. So I was like, it was like super quiet. But I was like, oh, okay, that's super awesome. The only bad experience I've had with an Airbnb, was the surprise that I got in the bathroom of the one in Harlem.
Oh, that's a great way to start a sentence.
Well, I think I've shown you the picture before of the world's smallest bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah. That was hilarious. But I mean, like, that's like a classic New York thing that is just like you like watch it in a TV show and you're like, New York, there's no space there.
Yeah, I'd be like,
and then then you've got an Airbnb and it's like, no, yeah, you have to flip your leg into the bath in order to actually use the toilet.
The fact that when I went into the tub to take a shower and I could feel my feet curling from both ends. And getting a bit of a panic attack from how close I had to be to the shower head. I'm like, this was worth it for the price, but I'm gonna I might need a Xanax or something after the shower, which is typically not a sentence I say aloud or have that thought. But yeah, that was That was interesting. Ricardo asks our final question. Says, James mentioned his possible jealousy over Arif's role as guardian angel for Mr. Don from Ohio. Says, I have a proposal. As the wife and I are godless heathens, our daughters currently have no godparents. Given this, I could offer James the role of protected troll over my little ones. The offer does come with a few stipulations. Number one, the title has no real responsibilities unless my daughters encounter any disputes related to the crossing of bridges, the preparation of mutton, or arguments involving multiple billy goats. I get that. Number two, as it has little responsibility, it also offers zero pay outside of any positive karma one might get from a cosmic sense. Number three, the offer may be revoked at any point if my wife finds out I made it and takes issue with my choice of protective entity.
Perhaps she would prefer a Yeti or Mothman instead. All right, so you're a protecting troll or protecting troll, which involves disputes relating to billy goats, preparation of mutton, crossing of bridges, all things that trolls are experts in. Yeah, I mean, that's up to you, James. What do you think?
You know what? I'm down. I'll send them a nice card for their birthday. Call it good. I'm not saying it completely fixes the whole you're Don from Ohio's guardian angel, but I'll take solace where I can. That'll work for me. I don't know if she would prefer a Yeti or a Mothman, but maybe she can accept a Norse Code Nessie instead. That is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Arif, where can they find your work?
Yeah, over at The Athletic, theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter where I post all my work at Arif Hassan NFL. Don't think I've got any other podcast appearances scheduled. So that's about it. Yeah.
Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Again, hope you guys have enjoyed it. We'll be back later this week to preview the next game on the schedule, which is the Jags game. So, again, my name is James. Thank you so much for Arif. And please remember that all things are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci. And sometimes through the amazing interceptions of Carson Wentz. But again, we will see you later this week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.